Hosts of the working group, along with Emily Janik, and welcome, and we're glad you're here.
All right, I think we're good to start. We'll still keep letting people in as they arrive, but as Lane said, please feel free to welcome yourself, introduce yourself in the chat box as we come in. All right, and I think before we start the event, I wanted to introduce myself and SID-W. My name is Malva Karandive, and I'm the program coordinator for SID-W. And welcome to today's event hosted by the Policy and Learning Workgroup. For those that are unfamiliar with SID-W, we are the largest and most active chapter of the Society for International Development, an international network that was founded in 1957 to serve as a global forum dedicated to sustainable economic, social, and political development. So kind of as we are discussing today. SID Washington serves as a global town square for the international development community, bringing together people from diverse organizations, disciplines, and career stages in a neutral, independent forum to share information and discuss important issues and challenges facing our industry. So there are 3 different ways that you can get involved with us. You can visit us at sidw.org to see what our upcoming events are. You can sign up for our weekly newsletter, a link to which you will find on our website, and you can follow us on social media to stay in touch with all the things that are happening at SID-W. So we do have a small poll that we've instituted kind of to understand who our participants are and where you're joining us from. So if you don't mind participating in this poll, I will launch it now and I will keep it open for a few seconds. Right, so I see a lot of participants today are SID-W members. So if you've joined us, this is another one of our events that you've been to, welcome back. For those that are not, thank you for being here today, and we do hope that you will follow us in the future as well. And yeah, welcome to this event today. We will be sending in a link to a survey that we do after the event as well, but in case you're not able to stay on for the rest of the event, please make sure to copy this link. Your feedback is very important to us, and it helps us kind of improve our events as we go and listen to what our participants want to do. A few housekeeping rules and things to note. This is a recorded event, and recording of this event will be available on our website and through our social media and our other network channels. For those that's registered for this event, you will be sent a link to this recording after the event, as well as an event summary. We also offer live transcription closed captioning, and it can be enabled through your own personal settings if you go to more. If you have any issues enabling that, please make sure, like you could either send a message in the chat box or send a direct message to me and we can help you figure that out. If you have any questions to submit, please make sure you send them in via the chat box. And you can also introduce yourself if you're comfortable doing so we can recognize who the question came from when we start the Q&A portion. I will kind of hand it over to Emily now, who will introduce herself, one of our co-chairs for the Policy and Learning Workgroup, as well as Lane.
Hi, everybody. I'm Emily Janik. I'm the Director of Knowledge Management and Learning at CARE. And with Lane, I have the great pleasure to be one of the co-chairs of this event. And we're really excited for the group today and the conversation, but I'm going to let Lane introduce herself before we move on to the panelists.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lane Pollock. I'm a Senior Learning Advisor with USAID's Bureau for Policy Planning and Learning and the other co-chair. Back to Emily. I do want to say again, thank you so much for coming. We're really excited about this topic.
So we did over the summer, we did a sort of work group planning meeting. If you were able to join us for that, we were delighted to have you and got a lot of really interesting suggestions about what this work group wants to think about and focus on for the year. And then we followed that up with some polls that went to the membership list and posted on LinkedIn, went out in a couple of different places. And one of the issues that came up, one of the topics people proposed is how do you build trust for learning? Everybody says they want to be a learning organization. Everybody understands that learning is important, but it can be really challenging to do. Learning requires vulnerability. Sometimes it requires admitting that you don't know or you were wrong, and that you really need safe spaces to do that in. And so that was one of the topics that we discussed at the last meeting. And we thought, well, who would we invite to have a conversation about that? It's a really interesting conversation, and who would we invite? So we have a great set of panelists for you today who are going to talk about their different experiences, different perspectives on how to build trust, who you build trust with, how all of that makes learning possible. And what we're going to do is pass over to Sarah Schmidt, who has kindly agreed to be a moderator on the panel today. So Sarah, do you want to go ahead and get started?
Thanks, Emily. Yes, I am Sarah Schmidt, and I am a practitioner of organizational learning and knowledge management, and currently the director for Latin America and Caribbean at Environmental Incentives, and I'm really excited to be moderating this panel today. I'm going to ask each one of the presenters to quickly introduce themselves, and then I'll give a little bit of an agenda and run of show of how sort of the next hour and a bit will work with all of us together. So Donana, can I ask you to introduce yourself first?
Was that me?
It was.
Oh, hello. Thank you. In the spirit of vulnerability and trust, I am going to read an I am poem because I secretly want everybody to use these instead of resumes to introduce themselves. I am African by birth, American through naturalization. I am an immigrant forged from the hateful ideology of apartheid, tempered by the casual and relentless racism of the United States, joyfully and unapologetically indomitable. I am a torchbearer, a storyteller, a steward of knowledge. I am a woman, a daughter, a sister, a friend, a non-blood related auntie. I am a Tar Heel, a New Yorker, an opera singer, a logophile, a philanthropist. I am loved, cherished, privileged, angry. I am Donita Fulkane.
Thank you, Donita. That was beautiful. Danielle, can I ask you to introduce yourself next? And then we'll go to BB.
That was beautiful. I wish I had prepared something as elegant. So I'm Danielle Thomas. I'm so grateful to be here with you all. I go by she, her pronouns. I sit on Muskogee land, also known as Atlanta, Georgia. I am, in the spirit of Donita, I'm going to just say I am a mother, I am a daughter, I am a sister, I am an organizer, I am a abolitionist, I am a Black woman who really does focus on organizational change, but more importantly, focus on community inspiration and community relationship building. And so that is my core of my work. And I am also a sci-fi geek who very much enjoys Afrofuturist work and hope to one day write my own versions of those. So I will pass to the next person. Thank you all for having me.
Thanks, Danielle. All right, Beatrice, BB, if you can introduce yourself.
So I think BB's facing some technical difficulties.
Okay. Okay. Well, if BB, if you get back online and you can hear me, or if you can unmute yourself in a minute, you can introduce yourself. First, I'm going to go through then the agenda briefly and let folks know sort of how we'll be moderating this session. Each one of our presenters is going to go through sort of a short presentation, sort of sharing as Emily mentioned, some of their learning and their experiences related to building trust, specific to sort of allowing for learning across organizations or with stakeholders, with communities, with teams. And then we'll go into sort of a moderated discussion, but we will also be moderating the chat and taking questions. So please, as we go along, feel free to add those questions into the chat, and we'll try to weave them in, but we'll also save time towards the end to make sure that it's more of a discussion. So with that, and we'll wrap up about 9:25, 9:30. So with that, I am going to ask Danielle to go first in terms of sort of sharing your reflections with the group to kick us off.
Hi, everyone, again. I'm really excited to be here. I have a very short presentation. It's actually more me talking to you all than actually presenting. But I wanted to just give you a little bit background on who I am. I worked at CARE for 7 years. I just recently left. But during my time at SID-US, I was a part of the fundraising team, and I ended my work there as a part of a hybrid kind of innovation and fundraising. I spent quite a bit of time also there working around development of the various diversity and equity and inclusion initiatives that we had, including D&I Council. I was the chair of the Black professionals at CARE. And I had a temporary assignment as one of the DEI staff liaisons who really worked on global trainings and policies and procedures. Currently, I support all aspects of a women of color-led firm that is seeking to breathe equity and community presence and justice into monitoring and evaluation practices. And so I wanted to really just have a moment to talk to you all about what I think is probably the cornerstone of this is around leading, and it's around trust. And so I titled this presentation Reflections on Inclusion and Trust and Leading to Learning. If we go to the next slide, this is kind of something I just want to say, which I think we all know this, but what is trust? I think trust is a belief in the character or strength of another. It is really about confidence. And so for me, I think strength and, I think trust is probably, if not the greatest strength that an organization can have. But often when it comes to our organizations, they're juxtaposed against the world, right? Our companies, our organizations are microcosms of the world. So they themselves have historical and current oppressions because that's what our world exists in. And so when we think about trust, it is often kind of said as if, well, staff should automatically have trust in organizations because we all believe in missions. It's actually more closer in line to relationships and the people that we exist with each other. And so lived experience can often be the most valuable and the biggest expertise a person and a staff can have. However, that also can make people vulnerable to emotional and psychological and even physical safety concerns, just because, again, they're bringing themselves to this organization. And so when we ask people to have trust and we ask people to learn, we have to take those things into account. What are people experiencing within the organization? What are people experiencing within the world that could actually either guide them closer to learning or actually their desire to pull away and to conform? And so building trust is really hard. I think it's probably one of the hardest things to do. And I think rebuilding trust is harder. Once trust is broken, it can be often almost impossible to regain without some serious work. And so I wanted to just give my reflections on what I've seen to be some of the best practices to building trust. And more importantly, what are some of the best practices and examples of how the organizations that I've worked in and been a part of have really tried to shepherd people into a spirit of learning with trust in mind, with relationships in mind. So if we go to the next slide, I think one of the things that I wanted to focus on is these 4 aspects. We know we're talking about trust, but we're also really what we're talking about is culture. I like to say that anti-racism work, DEI work, that is leadership work, which is also a part of cultural work. And so what is the culture of the organization? Depending on your placement in an organization, you should look at it from what are we saying we want to do? What are we saying we're doing? And then also, how are people actually experiencing it? Because you can have a very clear vision of what you want the culture to be, but if people are not experiencing it that way, it actually doesn't mean much, right? And so one of the aspects that I found to be really important in this conversation around culture, building trust, and building a learning community is really around representation. We all know about diversity. That's great and all. We're excited about it. We want to have representation at all levels of the people who are closest to the issues, really being at the forefront of the work and really being a part of it. But we also need to think about power. And I think for me, a lot of times I have witnessed folks have lots of representation, but actually hold no power. And that can be disconcerting for a lot of people. And so I think of this as one of those places where we should be asking questions like, are we looking at previous or current oppressions from the macro level to the micro level? Transparency, reconciliation, vulnerability, those are all a part of that representation and leadership structure. Is that present? Is representation all we're going for? Is that's what, if our metrics are only evaluating representation, how far can you achieve the actual trust and essentially creating change within the organization? And so the second piece, which I think goes hand in hand with representation, is we're trying to solve some of these, huge global crises around the world. We're trying to solve issues within the community. It needs to be collaborative. People need to feel like they have ownership over solutions. They have ownership over the context, even like if I represent this community, if this is my community that I'm a part of, I want to be at the table when we're talking about it. And so collaboration is really key to building trust. Making decisions shouldn't be top down always. People should feel included in that. And so some of the questions that I ask around this is who's setting the learning agendas? Who's actually facilitating these conversations? Who's convening the people and bringing people together? And then also, this might sound a little wishy-washy, but how are people feeling emotionally about the work that they're doing? Not just intellectually, not just metrics around their performance, but actually their emotions. Like, what do people feel when they come to work, and what do people feel when they leave? That actually breeds a sense of wanting to collaborate. People who feel as if they can't be a part of things will not collaborate, right? And they will be less likely to. And so that is a part of it. I want us to not just intellectualize people's experiences, but also really listen to them and hear them and really take in what people are saying around their emotions. And then the third thing is learning mindsets, which as a previous innovation person working in that space, learning mindsets was pretty important. I actually learned that learning mindsets, for me, I've witnessed is lots of people are ambitious, they want to grow, they want to find opportunities, but that doesn't always, that's not always praised. And so I think for me, are we encouraging mistakes? The best innovations I have seen from work that we've been doing recently is around people saying, oh, I thought it was going to be this thing, but it actually turned out to be that thing. And that's great. And people are able to reflect on the mistakes that they made and shift that. Learning mindsets also is really thinking about, are we giving people a chance to stretch? Are we asking people, how are you needing to be supported in order to grow? How are you needing to be supported in order to reach the goals that you have set for yourself? Are we nurturing that? And then finally, around that same piece is, are we praising just the successes and not the mistakes and the growth? I think that we need to really think about that, because that is also a signal of what is expected, right? So people who are always being praised for success are often seen as, yay, we're excited, but the people who are trying to get there might feel discouraged. So we need to praise all of the levels of growth, success and failures even, as long as the failures are learning opportunities and we're giving people space to reflect and shift. Finally, inclusion. I think the inclusion piece is, for me, one of the most important pieces. I think that is an acknowledgement and a reflection and actually taking action over previous oppressions and harm. Really thinking about who's in the room, what might they be facing from an existential level, historical level, cultural inside the organization, what is happening? And so if you can take a look at that, does that mean that everyone has access to the same opportunities? Does everyone have access to the same level of growth, right? And I think one of the other things that I often think about this, we think about inclusion as, just policies and procedures, but I think it's also a level of access around how are we giving people the ability to engage with the resources that we give them, right? Or that we're creating together. How are the resources given? Now, what languages are they in? What pronouns are they using? What, even beyond just all of that, what even academic language are we using that maybe everyone is not privy to, right? And so just really taking a look at some of our tangible pieces, like the actual things that we are using to really determine, are we bringing people in or excluding them? And so I think from my point of view, these are, it's not to say that everyone or anyone has all of these figured out, but they have been some of the key kind of components. We can take this down and done. Kind of key components around how you build a culture where people feel safe, people feel heard, people feel seen, and they actively want to show up as full humans. I think that's what we want in this work. We need it in this work. We want people to feel as if they can bring their lived experience, which is the best teacher, to the work that we're doing. And so these are the pieces that for me have been just kind of, if people get these right, things shift. And I think that that is important to note. The only final thing I'll say is that, I don't think that all of these are figured out. I think that we have to actively work to continually evolve them. And DEI work and diversity, equity, inclusion, justice work is ever evolving because the spectrum changes, right? It shifts. And so we need to be continually thinking about those shifts. And so I'll stop there. I hope that was helpful, and I hope you understood what I was saying.
Thanks, Danielle. No, that was, and there was definitely in the chat some, thank you for sharing this, thank you for pointing this out, +1. And, I really appreciated this part towards the end about, showing up as a full human. And I like how you sort of separate it into those 4 components. But I can see how maybe for some individuals who are either just starting this work or joining an organization, it might feel overwhelming to think about either the amount of change or, hearing this and saying, yes, this is great. Any thoughts on sort of small steps or things that an individual can do, especially maybe if they're not in a leadership position or they don't have that decision-making power? Any reflections there in terms of?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I often try to do is build community, even in the spaces that I'm in. And so I think when people feel as if they are powerless, joining others, there's somebody else in the organization who probably also feels similarly. So I would say it's not up to one person to shift organizations. I think that's actually almost impossible. I think it is about building, sadly, which can feel daunting too, is to build coalitions. If you feel like there is something unjust or inequitable within the organization, having other people around you to support that work, to come up with strategies, to come up with how we would handle communication, I think is probably one of the best things you can do. Don't hold it in. Don't try to subdue what you're feeling as much as try to articulate it to others within your peer group. And again, just building that community is probably the greatest thing that I did to kind of survive some of the issues that feel bigger than me, which they always do, right? So yeah, that's the first step, I would say. Find other people.
That's great. Yeah. And the other thing too, I think that's I'm picking up in chat that is really resonating with people is around sort of inclusive language and plain language. I could see that also as something as an individual that you could practice, no matter, it doesn't have to be an organizational practice, it can be an individual practice. Any other reflections specific to that? I know, again, it looked like that was something that was resonating with listeners.
Language, again, is also always evolving, right? And so we know that, for instance, there are lots of ways in which pronouns have become a part of our everyday conversation, which maybe even 5 years ago, I don't know if they were as prevalent as a part of just how we introduce ourselves or how we talk about things. People are actually thinking about like terms like, hey guys, which is an interesting thing, right? And so I think for me, what I always do is gut check with others, peer check. Not necessarily within the organization, but if I can, if it's not confidential or things like that, I really do like to take it to my mom and say, hey, does this, like, do you understand what this says? Like, and she, I'm not trying to be funny, she will tear it to pieces. She's like, I don't understand anything about this. And I will, that actually helps me, because if she is one part of this target audience that I'm going for, or even if she's not the target audience, I actually don't know what levels people are kind of at in this language understanding. And so that's what I mean, that's one of the things that I try to do. And it actually makes me a better thinker. It makes me a more inclusive communicator, if that's the way to say it. I think also one of the things around language that I've often, I had to kind of also think about was the translation thing is something that everyone kind of does now. Really being honest about who's doing the translation, what is the language that we're actually translating to. So meaning if we're trying to reach people in certain places, they might actually not speak Portuguese, they might speak some Creole version. Do we want to think about having a dialect versus having us go into some other language that the people that we're actually trying to reach are not using? And so it's things like that that I think just take a little bit of time. And I don't think, I also just frame this as saying, this is slow also. This work is not going to happen instantaneously. It's not quick. It is going to probably require the rest of our lifetimes to really get it somewhat right. I mean, we can try to do our best every day, but again, it's evolving and it shifts, and we have to be patient with that. And we have to make mistakes so that we can do better. And so, yeah, that's one of the pieces around language. Hopefully that's helpful.
Danielle, I appreciate that piece about, patience. But I guess also to your point about trust,
Urgency.
Say that again.
Important.
And urgency. Right. The balance between patience and urgency. Because, patients not wanting to kind of create then sort of non-action, but also, maybe to some of your first points of, in the whole self of empathy too, and building confidence in one another. And so I appreciate that.
And yes, I know that people do think you can become an anti-racist organization in 2 months. That is so true. I definitely think that people think it, but no, I don't believe. Yes, I appreciate that. And also in the sense of urgency, I think urgency is important. I think that we do have to have grace for learning, even within this type of work, right? Even as a Black woman, I have grace for myself for not always having the answers, because I don't embody every identity. I can't, there's no possible way that I could. So I have grace for myself, and I rely on others who are closer to context, closer to communities that I am trying to talk to or reach, to give me the answers. I don't think that you should require yourself to know all the answers all the time.
Thanks, Danielle. All right, we're gonna transition over to Danita. If you want to share, I think you also have a few slides.
I do, but I also, first of all, just want to say how much I resonate with everything you said, Danielle. By the way, my middle name is Danielle. And so I feel like it's a transitive property that is now moving across us. And it's amazing like how much we overlap with different words. And I think you'll see that too. So like Emily, I am a knowledge manager, and this is one of my favorite quotations about knowledge management. It's also a really nice reminder for me, because as Danielle said, I don't have all of the answers by any stretch of the imagination. And so rather than trying to give answers, I just want to put into your head lots of questions that you can take away and talk to your mom, Danielle. I want to talk to your mom now. And like, take to your organization, take to your colleagues, take to your networks and say, hey, what do you think about this? Because I think that one of the first entrees into trust is conversation. And conversation just doesn't have to be just words. It can be a piece of art. It can be a meme. It can be a whole lot of different things. But, and the other thing I said that this is a reminder to myself is that I could literally talk about these things for days. And I have, 15 minutes. So I will try and keep myself on track. But if anybody needs to give me a time check, please do, because, I can't be trusted, except I can trust. So the first thing is, as I mentioned, I am a knowledge manager, and for organizational trust, I think it's really important I love to disaggregate things because I want to see like what's where, who's what. So I won't go into this very long, but the 3 pillars of knowledge management are technology, process, and people. And the people are often forgotten when you're thinking about systems and building trust within systems, because you're like, oh, we're starting a new CRM, so we have to like figure out the technology and the process. And you're like, but they're agnostic. They don't do anything that's not being told to them by the people. So people can make things really wonderful, or they can mess stuff up. And so if you don't have all 3 of these sort of juggling in your organization at the same time, you are setting yourself up for failure. My beautiful, beautiful organizational stool of knowledge is one of the things that, as I was trying to make sense of these things myself, I was like, oh, all of these things feed into what we're doing: process, technology, and people. And I love this little stool, except I was like, but it still does the thing that is one of the biggest problems in all of our organizations right now, which is siloing things. So I was like, well, what if I put the stool on its side? Then we've got people, process, and technology all together. We're still not like, they're still a little separate. But then it's about creating pathways between people, process, and technology, because when you do that, you are creating trust. And so think about that for a second in a practical term, right? If you trust your technology, which means you've asked the end users what they need out of it, you've asked the organization what the goal of this technology is. Danielle, when you're talking about inclusion into so many of these things, like you can be traumatized by technology and you can be traumatized by process, and you can definitely be traumatized by people, right? So if you've got technology that makes you want to like stab somebody, I'm so sorry, that's such a bad, violent image. If it makes you just like grit your teeth in anger every single time, that's not useful. That puts you in a bad mood before you've even started your day. So if you've got trust in your technology, that's great. And you've got trust in your people, also amazing. If your process stinks, you've got an uneven stool. And so it's keeping all of these things moving at the same time, which is arguably very difficult. But if you just focus on one thing, and I find that this happens with organizations all the time, is that there are people problems that nobody wants to address, so they throw process at it. And then you end up with these processes that are ridiculous, that you have like a 7-page form to fill out for no reason other than somebody who left the organization 5 years ago had a bad interaction with somebody in HR one time or in IT one time. And you're like, why are we doing it this way? I trust your processes. And if they are looking suspicious, question them. Why are we doing it this way? Even if it stays the same, you've started a fantastic conversation with your colleagues about, now, how did we get here? You get some history of the organization, you get some people's ideas on stuff. People, process, technology, make them work. So what does that mean about how do you build this community of trust, right? I came across the article 12 Ways to Build Trust at Work, and I'll make sure to put a link in that. I'll send the link to SID so that we can send it out. This sort of blew my mind a little bit. And here's the thing about knowledge managers, and Emily, you can correct me if you think that I'm way off base, but I don't create a lot of content. I just take content that already exists and I repackage it in a way that makes people go, ooh, I have a question. So this is from 12 Ways to Build Trust at Work. There are two types of trust: emotional, practical, and emotional. And let me just move you guys out of the way here. You're in my way. There you go. So the practical trust is, and I'm just going to read from this slide because it's important. This type of trust can be earned by being a steadfast worker. You meet commitments, show up on time, and do what you say you'll do. People rely on your competence and dependability. They trust you to get the job done. This trust is fundamental. If you don't have it, your team is facing some big problems. It can lead to a lack of communication, knowledge hoarding, micromanagement, duplication of work, missed deadlines, and terrible productivity. So we all know we felt those practical people that we can and cannot trust. Oh my God, he is going to miss that deadline again. What do I do? I have it. It's the group project thing, right? Emotional trust. This type of trust is next level, and it's what takes teamwork in the workplace to do the next level too. It's when people trust that you're on their side. They know you'll treat them kindly and respectfully, that you won't judge them for their setbacks, and they're comfortable telling you their honest thoughts, feelings, and ideas. This type of trust is obviously far more complex. It goes beyond hard work and respecting other people's time. It requires a certain level of emotional intelligence. The good news is, even if you don't think you have this as an innate skill, it can be learned. So this, I was like, oh, that's what it is. And in fact, in this article, they create a trust equation. It's trust equals perception of credibility, perception of reliability, plus intimacy divided by perception of self-orientation. All of that to say,
What?
like, yeah, right? What? All of this boils down to, Daniel, we got to co-present at some point. It boils down to the fact that if you are trusted to meet all of your deadlines and get all of your deliverables in on time, but people don't trust you to have their back, your trust perception is very low. If you miss a few deadlines here and there, but somebody's like, you know, I can always go to her when I need something. I can go to her and talk about the fact that my boss just said something ridiculous, or that I just did something ridiculous. Even if that practical trust isn't so high, that emotional trust gets you a trust score that is much, much higher. And we all know people like that, right? We know that the Gallup surveys that we do for employee surveys, right? One of the questions on there is, do you have a best friend at work? And if you do, it's so much easier to like, wait, I got to check something with you. So-and-so just said this. Should I be offended or should I let this one go? So it's like, you know, who do you have to watch your back at work? And if you don't have somebody, then it's that much harder. So that's the trust equation. Think about that, emotional and practical trust. And the last thing I'll go into really is levels of relationship. This comes from Humble Leadership, Ed and Peter Schein. What this basically is at level -1, you've got this sort of one-to-many relationship of you do this, you have no say. And everybody's like, oh, that sounds bad. But when you're in a hurricane and you have to get into shelter, you want somebody to be like, you go there now. We don't want a committee to handle a hurricane. Level 1, and this is where a lot of people are in organizations, is a transactional and role-based professional, right? It's the professional thing. I need this thing from you to finish my job. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. We all have those sorts of relationships. Level 2 is this personal, cooperative, trusting relationships. This is where you start, like everybody well, no, not everybody, but a lot of people in my organization know that I hate bell peppers. And they'll like look out for me. Donita, you don't want to eat that because that's got bell peppers. You can't see them, but they're there, trust me, right? Level 3 is then when you sort of have a shared identity. There is no bad conversation that you can have. And so the thing is, people, when we talk about these levels of relationship, people are like, they go to one and be like, oh, that one's bad. Oh, that one I want to do. It's negotiating all of these levels of relationship all at the same time. Like, I do not want to have a level 2 conversation with somebody in my organization every single day. I'm sorry, but that's like the DTR, the defining of the relationship. In my relationships, platonic, romantic, whatever, the first 3 months are key because I will have a defining the relationship conversation like every week. How do you like to get your communications? Are you, do you prefer to be called or texted or whatever, right? But I don't want to talk about feelings every single day. Come on, y'all. That's just too much, right? Every once in a while, I just want somebody to be like, here's our HR policy, do it. But what I have learned is if you get to that level 2 relationship occasionally in your organization, the level 1 relationship becomes that much easier, right? I have a trusted relationship with Sarah. And so therefore, when I ask Sarah to get me that document, she's not going to be like, why do you need this? This is not even in your wheelhouse. Sarah's going to be like, okay, great, here you go. It makes the transaction go faster, ultimately leading to more efficiency in your organization, ultimately leading to your bottom line being raised. And this is why it's so important to have touchy-feeling conversations about trust and about what it means and what you need to build trust in your team, in your organization, in your sector, in the world. And with that, I will stop.
Thanks, Donita. I'm curious too, towards the beginning of your slides, you had, you know, the 3 pies, people, process, technology, and then you had the arrows going in the intersection. You did originally, yeah, have trust on the outside, but something I just heard from you is that also trust can speed up maybe that process, that internal piece. And maybe if you want to talk a little bit about, you know, what that can and should sort of look like or feel like in terms of efficiencies. So to your point, if you get to a level 2, it makes the level 1 go much faster. And so I heard a few things in terms of, you know, creating relationships, things like that. Again, building off of Danielle's presentation, especially around emotions, but maybe about other tools or lessons learned about creating that trust in those three spaces to make it go more efficiently.
Sure. Yeah, collaboration moves at the speed of trust. Yeah. And what's the other one? Eat something for breakfast. Culture eats strategy. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Yeah. So just a clarification on the little pie thing. The trust encapsulated everything: people, process, and technology. Yeah. So where it can move things along is, let's talk about racial equity, right? One of the things we were talking about this earlier as we were getting onto the call, that I'm needing to go into the office 1 or 2 days a week. My commute into the office is a hellscape. And I think about the fact that other people have different commutes. Some people can take the bus, some people can walk, other people can take a train in. So it means that sometimes when I come into the office, which I love the office very much, I am so overstimulated and like anxiety ridden from my commute that I can't engage with somebody right then. I have to like sit for a minute, right? And so having people understand, the space to say, my commute is really terrifying right now. In a place with everybody else, people will understand. Give her 20 minutes to settle in, and then she can become, a much more useful human being. So there's that little personal trust, right? The trust in the technology, for example, I shouldn't even say, okay, hypothetical situation. You've started doing some large technical integration into your organization, a CRM, an intranet, something like that. And you say, we need to get this done in a year. If you're not building trust into the equation, if you're not having a place where people can say, no, I know that looks like something that should work, but we've got this person and this person in the organization who are not going to understand that. And if they don't understand it, they will not make anybody else learn it. And so you've lost a quarter of the organization. If you hear that, then you can adjust for it and go, okay, we'll change some of the procedures, and therefore we can get this technology up and going a little bit faster. Because you can put up a CRM, you can put up an intranet in like, what, 2 months? Getting people to use them? No. So like understanding where I'm one of those people who likes to gather all of the information first and then sort of move. And then as I get closer to the goal, it narrows and it gets very much faster. It feels like a lot of our workplaces just want to be moving in any direction, regardless if it's right or wrong, and just so that they can check something off their list, right? That people have a very difficult time with just going, let's gather information and then pilot things. Very small groups of people, test it out, get the feedback, come back. We bring it out to a larger part of the organization. We gather feedback, we push it out some more, right? We had a plan to have a CRM, and by we, still a hypothetical organization, to build a CRM in 18 months. And 3 years later, it was still not done because we didn't do some of those things. I'll stop there.
No, that's great. And I was monitoring the chat as we were also going, and something else that came up that I think is interesting that I want to sort of also pose to you, related to those levels of relationships. Lexine was making an interesting point about how even maybe perceptions or how we view those relationships. So her example that she gave is, that someone maybe in your organization, sees that relationship as needing to be at a level 2, but you actually think it should be at a level 1. And the potential, and then other parts of the chat, they were bringing up how power dynamics can play into that, gender can play into that. Anyway, I don't know if you want to sort of reflect a little bit on that.
Yeah, I tried to limit my slides, but another slide I have is my 3 bullets for building trust are addressing power and privilege, accounting for trauma, and reimagining and rebuilding on what's already there. Because, people come into an organization and they're like, all right, I want to put my mark on it. And so therefore we're going to take everything that we've learned and say, nope, this doesn't work. We're going to start all over again, rather than listening to the people who've been doing the work for the last 5-10 years and can then go, wait a second. So this part, yeah, that was when we were still working in an antiquated system. This is the reason for that process, but this piece of that needs to stay there. Because if you don't look at this if you don't keep this little piece, this, and this becomes a domino effect and just like what, right? The accounting for trauma is huge as well. We take trauma from workplace to workplace, and we get triggered by that trauma, and it makes us less able to do what we're supposed to do. And it is something that we as a business world need to address. When somebody first says to me, wow, I understand what being gaslit feels like, it makes me go, oh, okay, I can breathe. I'm starting at a different point, right? As far as like the relationship levels, that in itself is a beautiful conversation. You can say to somebody, so I'm an oversharer. Everybody knows about my family, my mom and dad. They're like, say hi to your mom and dad, and my sister, and all that kind of stuff. Not everybody wants to talk about those things at work. And you can establish an intimacy about the fact that you respect those boundaries, right? You say, in our scope of work, this is as far as we will go. But within that scope, we will talk about how you feel about the staff meeting, or about how this process in our organization is working, because that also promotes a level of intimacy, and that's how we become Skynet also. But it's all about just having the conversations.
I hear that, Danita. Thank you. Definitely conversations, sort of ending where you started in terms of critical conversations. I do want to, Bibi is now with us. She didn't have a chance to introduce herself. So Beatrice, if you can just do a very brief introduction of yourself, and then we can jump into some of your reflections and experience.
Yes, well, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. And I'm really excited about the reflections from Danielle and Donita. And I prepare a presentation about me in my presentation, because I'm a lawyer. I think Donita and Danielle explained process and emotion, but as a lawyer, I think, and human rights defender, I can share what I have been learned about trust through my own experience in a country that has break the confidence and the trust in all the population. And that is based on the situation and of the democracy in the country, and how citizens and activists and Venezuelans, we are working to recover hope, and trust is the key word. I want to share my my presentation. I'm sorry. And this I name the a multi-dimension crisis in Venezuela. That's the country that I'm from, and how I express this experience as a keyword like resilience and articulation. I'm sorry. I came from Venezuela. This is a country that is in the northern coast of South America, and it was known as the sorry, as the largest oil reserve, that has been one of the world leading exported oil. And in the 80s, Venezuela was admired for many countries because their resources, oil, minerals, cocoa, gas. We have like a paradise in our country, and Venezuela was seen like a richest nations in Latin America. I born in the 80s, and I live in my childhood that feelings in a country that we have a wonderful weather and multiple resources that have provide to the citizens a very good life. And during the 60s and the 90s, Venezuela had a democracy with independence of powers and the respect of the rule of law. It was not perfect. It has its very problems and difficulties, but in that time we have faith and trust in voting, elections, and as an instrument of social transformation. And we have one of the most stable democracy, having a president during those 4 years, a non-military civilian president. But since 2019, 2021, we have been to a deterioration of democracy and the corruption and loss of institutional capacity and repression, and that change of all the life that's Venezuelan, as a Venezuelan we have before. And we face a crisis that is multidimensional and affect the dignity of all the people in Venezuela. When Chavez became president, I was 20 years old when I graduated as a lawyer. And after that, I start myself to the academic and research in human rights in the same university that I was graduate. I became a professor in early, and also I worked as a professor in the legal clinics, attending migration from Colombia to Venezuela, because at that time, all the refugees from Colombia go to Venezuela because we are a neighbor country, but also because they offer, Venezuela was open to receive many migrants from many countries. But in 2014, the repression and the persecution and against the against the population, but especially for the students that were to protest as a process of law, I defend students that were arbitrary detention because the protest. And when I saw as a Venezuelan this repression getting higher, we found an organization called CEPAS to defend human rights, democratic values, and culture of peace in my country. But for safety reasons, but also for personal reasons, in 2019, I based in New York, and I have dedicated my work to international advocacy for human rights in Venezuela. And the base of I want to share is how we can react and how we can build trust and how organize ourselves to face repression, because the repression breaks all the confidence between people, and how to run an organization who is against this environment of individualism, and we are trying to build and recover trust and democracy together. We start to understand how to do it when we saw the repression. We start to educate people about their rights and make them conscious about what's happening in their environment, and how they can do with documentation, no democratic governments violations visible to what happened in Venezuela. And they start to feel the power to know their rights, to know how to defend their rights. And we call that the 3D of the human rights: documentation, denounce, and disseminations. The powers was not about one organization doing that for them. We build trust with them, giving the tools to learn and accompany them to understand what was happening. And in that way, we understand that for them was very difficult to do it alone, because the feeling and the aggression and the repression. And we understand that they need a platform to work together. And that's why we built network of collaboration for working for human rights. And that was the process that we built, the knowledge and the space that they can feel the trust to work together and protect themselves. And we start this dynamic of networks of collaboration for work for human rights. And because we thought that when the repression and the violation of human rights were higher, the people get fear and they paralyze. And that's why, and they feel they don't believe, because every person can be your enemy. And that is the idea that the government put in your mind, that everybody can be against you. And we have to say that as a citizen, we share our love for our country, we share our love about human rights and dignity, and we can work together to recover that. And together we have the strength, and that's why this I think this picture is important, to be together, to be bigger than the problem, because we are together. And this working in networks and having the methodology and have the platform to actions make us very strong. And in our role as a leader of that process was constantly being that tools and constantly build that space where they can feel safe. And also the situation about the humanitarian in Venezuela start to decrease, and was very important for us also have the recognition and the trust for international community. And we start to do the documentation about the situation, because nobody can believe that Venezuela has humanitarian emergency, because Venezuela is a middle rich country, one of the most prosperous democracies in Latin America, and only what is happening there is a political crisis. But as a citizen affected in our dignity, when you go to the supermarket, you cannot buy food, you cannot buy paper towels, you cannot find anything. We start to do with tools, the documentation, and go to the institution. This is a picture of me going to the High Court to Venezuela, saying we have a humanitarian emergency, but we don't have independent institution, and this legal demand in the High Court never was responded. And we start to look for international community and build trust with international organisms about what was happening in Venezuela. And we sent all that information, and we did together. And at that time, the General Secretary of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, said the first time in Venezuela, there is a humanitarian crisis caused by a political instability. But we still, because there is not official data about anything, we're still working with networks, showing what happened in the country, and doing this 3D methodology to show what happened with the water, with the health, with the food. And was very difficult, because nobody could believe that middle-income country, all country, was an humanitarian emergency. And this, and also try to understand what happened with us and put in words was something very important to build confidence with international community. And in that time, we don't have a natural disaster, we don't have interwar, but we found that with our knowledge, the description about the humanitarian emergency, that is a complex, because undermines the ability of society to survive and the national authorities to respond. And we start to explain to the world that we have a complex humanitarian emergency, and explain why. And the government of Venezuela qualifies us and goes against us, saying that we are on opposition, we are doing an instabilization of the country, and they deny that we are facing a humanitarian emergency. Well, we're still trying to build that confidence with the international community, and we document everything, and we send information, and we do these precautionary measures in the Inter-American Commission about the human rights situation, and explain how there is a policy of persecution to everybody who is asking for the rights to have food, to have the basis, the water, and also the world started to understand what we were saying since 2015, when we have this big crisis of human mobility, and the human mobility crisis, the refugees and from Venezuela were the mirror of the humanitarian emergency. And we used to be a host country from European and Latin American migration, but now we are the biggest country in Latin America, with the second crisis after Syria in the war about refugees and immigrants. And today we are a country with 30 million of population, and almost 6 million of Venezuela have left the country in the last 6 years. Also, we have this called the caminantes, the people who walk thousands of kilometers, risking their life, going to different Latin American countries, looking for surviving, because they cannot survive in Venezuela. And this is why explain the crisis in Venezuela and build confidence was so difficult, because it's a crisis with different dimensions: humanitarian, human rights, international criminal law, refugee, migration, and political. And we understand the importance of build that confidence with international community in and have that help. And was very difficult, because even inside we have this problem of work together, because the strategy of the government to put everything apart, and to avoid and demobilize people to work together and have this participation. We have this national dish that is called ayaca. You can see in the picture, is something very important for Venezuela. If you have the opportunity to try, do it, because it's delicious. And we prepare as an Asians indigenous in Venezuela. It's like a tamal, but have many, it's very difficult, because you have to have the leaf, you have to do something special for the dough, you have to, in the filling, you have to put many things, and it's very complex. And all the families in Venezuela, they choose like a 1 day or 2 days in Christmas, and we prepare this between family, and we did together. Some people put the house, other people do the filling, other people, and it's very complex to do it. And I understand how to build coalitions and to give a response, or an international response for the problem of Venezuela is going to be something complex, because we have a crisis that with everybody have to understand in a comprehensive way, also coherent, because you see how the international response was not in the dimensions and the necessity of Venezuelan, also articulate and coordinate with different mechanisms, activate in a simultaneous way, and with the preponderance of protect victims, because sometimes the international response was based only in the politicians' issues, but not in the center of the victims, and combine a classic and extraordinary mechanism, and also combine a response technical but political, because also we have a political, and was so complex. And imagine doing that work, looking for the international response for the different mechanisms as the ayaca. We have, as a civil society, as a citizen, to work together, building this international response that is complex, have many components, but if we did together, and everybody did like the ayaca, he did his part, but did together, we can have an international response with these characteristics. And that has been my work, building this trust to understand the problematic, but put everybody together, doing this the part, but together we can do this very difficult task. And that's why international local organization and with international organization, we look to the UN to have this international response for the problematic in Venezuela, building trust with each other and building trust with international community, and have this response about the investigate gross human rights violation and how to combat impunity. And we activate international mechanisms independent to look for justice and to respond to the crisis in Venezuela. And so one of the moments most important for me was in 2019, after all the documentation and information, we saw how in that time the General Secretary of UN, after many years to invisibilize the humanitarian situation in Venezuela, he said in his Twitter that in Venezuela there were 7 million people in humanitarian assistance. For me, it was like a sour and sweet, because and also the Mark Locke, the humanitarian coordinator, said that it's a very humanitarian problem. And was sweet and sour because was the first time that globally recognized the situation humanitarian in Venezuela, but took so many years and many people died in Venezuela we don't have that international response. But with our work, the humanitarian clusters and bodies were activated in Venezuela, and also is not enough, because they just recognize 7 million, but other organizations esteem that there are more than 40 millions of people in need. But for us, it was very important to open that help for Venezuelans. And also in the human rights violations, we have this recently, the decision of the International Criminal Court with the prosecutor opened an investigation in Venezuela. And also we find with the fact-finding mission and with the ICC, the International Criminal Court, a path for justice for the victims of atrocity crimes in Venezuela. Still, the civil organization and persons like me, human rights defenders, are criminalized in Venezuela. There are also restrictive law in Venezuela. We receive threats and accusations by the media, and it's very difficult to work there because there is a lot of propaganda making us not trust for people. But with our work and our work together, we build that trust. What is happening now? Well, the COVID pandemic is exacerbate the effect of the humanitarian emergency. There is aggravation, and there is a new wave of refugees, and human rights continue violated. But something that I think that has been with us, and we can be through this adversity, is that the citizens and the human rights defenders and people from Venezuela, inside Venezuela and South Venezuela, we still fighting in a peaceful way to have our country with democracy again. And what did we learn as a civil society, as a Venezuelan, in this process of adversity, and how I think we can build trust when the government strategy is generate fragmentation. One thing, and I think is the same that Daniel and Donity say in different way, but we learn that alone we go faster, but together we go for and we go for more places and confront repression, adversity, crisis, and fear in a network, in a collaborative way, trying together, make us the risk of be persecuted and be together, help us to go further. And articulation in our experience to activate international mechanism that was very difficult and complex task, require about the knowledge, require about the trust, require work together. And we understand that we cannot do it, because we have to be everywhere in different mechanisms and do teamwork. It was so important for us. To understand when demand extraordinary solution to extraordinary problems demands also do extraordinary actions, coordinate. And civil society and people organize is important for build this space and resilience. And the most important, be center of the dignity of the people. That is the most important. In diversity, you see what is really important. And when you see your equipments, your office, your everything, you conclude that the most important is the people who you work. When I have a raid or have the aggression, I don't care about what the office and the equipment. I care about people. And the Hope for Venezuela, what we are doing is combining our work of human rights and humanitarian work. I finding democracy. I'm doing this in a collaborative way to face the adversity. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Vivi. Something that was definitely resonating with people in the chat is this piece around coalition. And you even connected the dots, Vivi, between sort of the three of you. And this piece about importance of community. There was a lot of chat about that one image of the big fish eating the little ones, and then the little ones coming together to eat the big one. And I think that it's something that really connects those three sort of reflections that we've heard from everyone. So that's just something I wanted to highlight that was sort of going on as you were speaking, and what was resonating to everyone. I do have a question for all three of you, again, connecting the three presentations. And it was something too that was brought up in the chat around obviously that need for collaboration. All three of you spoke about it, but also this balance with consultation fatigue. So needing to collaborate, but knowing that people, especially right now, maybe even adding this element related to COVID, of the necessity of collaboration and especially to support inclusion and all of these things that we've been talking about, but the fatigue in doing that with community members. So maybe Danielle, I'll start with you and just sort of reflections on that, of that balance there of fatigue with necessity.
Yeah,
especially if you might be experiencing it now, again, with this remote world that we're in.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, because I think that is probably one of the more important pieces, right? Getting input and feedback and including people. I think there should be, I always like to say that we talk about survey fatigue, like getting people's input and hearing them. I don't know if people have survey fatigue as much as they have like inaction fatigue. Like people survey you all day long and then nothing happens. And so I think for me, it would be a conversation around how do we show staggering or phases or something where it's like, we got the feedback, look how we incorporated it, look how we're changing it, look how so I don't know, like there's a balance there. I think that sometimes if it's a huge project or a huge piece of work, you can, spend months and months and months and months of getting input, and that just might be distressing, but I also think you have to do it right, and you show people what you do with the information, and I think that stops a lot of the fatigue, to be honest.
Yeah,
I'm sure others have different experience.
Yeah, I think that this is definitely, it's resonating with folks, but Danita, yeah, thoughts, Vivi?
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, this is where here's where a lot of things come into play. One of the other things I saw in the chat was this idea of competition between departments and how to be able to collaborate across that. then it comes down to the transparency, it comes down to the clarity, it comes down to those levels of relationships, and it comes down to another really common knowledge management precept, which is knowledge is power, but knowledge shared is power multiplied. And if you have a certain amount of trust, one of the things I've learned as a knowledge manager is I don't copyright anything. I don't put anything, because I'm like, I can always come up with more ideas. If something that I do comes back at me in a different format in 3 years, I would celebrate the hell out of that, right? And because it's all about creating that change. If the collaboration, as Danielle said, I mean, it has to be there for a purpose. I don't know if y'all know Adrienne Marie Brown, but she's an author. She had a big role in the Black Lives Matter movement. And there was a bunch of people who had never been heard before, or had never been given a platform, or hadn't been able to create their own platform. And so when you get people like that together, there's an enormous amount of talking, because everybody needs to be heard because they've never been heard before. And they allowed for that, but it created a lack of consensus, a lack of decision making. And so it was this like maelstrom of talking and indecision and all of that. Everybody got tired of it really quickly. And what she started to do was, every time there was even the smallest decision made, like what to order for lunch, there's a dance break. She would put on some tunes from the 60s and everybody would dance. And so it became this thing of like, if you were the one holding up the decision making, not only were you holding that up, you were holding people back from dancing. And that was like a celebration of, hey, we are going to listen to everybody, but not everybody's going to be happy all of the time. Sometimes we have to come together and make a decision happen that works for most of us, if not all of us. Yeah, so anyway, lots and lots to say about that, but I'll stop.
Well, and that goes back to this inaction piece of, inaction fatigue. And obviously that inaction creates that distrust, or, you could see it being this sort of vicious cycle. But BB, also, one of the last things that you mentioned was around resilience. So maybe to this point of, collaboration and inclusion, not fatigue necessarily about that because it's so critical to the process, but maybe also too that there's a natural resilience if there is that trust. So I don't know if you want to add any last sort of reflection there, BB.
Yeah, I think this what motivates us to do the things is like a competition or collaboration. The competition is more about who is doing what, and the collaboration is what we are looking for. And when you are competition, the most important is the achievement and the recognition, and everybody wants it. But when you are doing a collaborative way, it's most important what we are achieved together and what we have to take time to do together and go far and away, more than we can do alone. And when everybody feels part of that achievement, and how to be part of a collective achievement and have this process of think and work and celebrate together. And we have to take time for that, to think together, to work together, and to celebrate together. This is the only way that we can celebrate and enjoy. And in experience like Venezuela or different crises of different environments where we are in hopeless about everybody think is bad, we can find in this collaborative way or more the resilience and how we can confront adversity. That's why in our case, we have a beautiful country, but we are very independent. Now we understand with the adversity, the importance of work together. But if we do that in good moments, I think it's better.
Thanks, BB. Lane, I'm gonna hand it over to you.
Yes, thank you so much. I have been absolutely riveted with this conversation and the presentations, the comments. Thank you to everyone for your engagement, particularly to our three panelists, Danita, Danielle, and Bibi. It's really fulfilled, I think, all of our great high expectations around the conversation today. So thank you. And thank you for bringing particularly the different dimensions on this question of trust. Internal, organization to organization. I too love the fish analogy and that network and coalition building in order to create change. So thank you. And a special thanks to Sarah for jumping in as moderator. We really, really appreciate that. And to SID for hosting, to SID Washington for hosting and all the support that they provide at each of these events. So I think on behalf of Emily and myself, we can close out. Thanks for coming. We hope to see you at the next event. Keep an eye on your email for what that might be. We also welcome at any time ideas or offers for topics that we want to make sure that we cover and really suit the needs of folks who show up. So thank you. And then I don't know if Malavika, if you want to say anything on behalf of SID Washington or just a reminder on the survey. There it is. I see it. Reminder on the survey. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.